The concrete trembles beneath Lieutenant Masaaki Ishida's boots as he presses his eye to the periscope. Dawn hasn't broken over Saipan's volcanic ridges, but the horizon burns with an impossible sight. Hundreds of American warships stretching across the Pacific like a steel constellation against the darkness. The salt air carries the metallic taste of war, mixed with the sulfur scent from Mount Tapochau's ancient craters. Ishida's hands shake as he adjusts the periscope focus. At 28, he's survived 3 years of brutal fighting in China, but nothing prepared him for this moment on June 13th, 1944. Through the lens, he counts the silhouettes: battleships, cruisers, destroyers, more naval firepower than Japan's entire combined fleet. His throat tightens. Every man in his bunker knows they're looking at their own execution. "Sir, the coastal battery reports ready," whispers Sergeant Yamamoto, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of ship engines. Behind them, 43 men of the Imperial Army's 43rd Division crouch in the reinforced concrete bunker that took months to construct. Steel plates, salvaged from sunken freighters, line the walls. Ammunition boxes stacked to the ceiling. They have enough rice for 2 weeks, enough bullets for one glorious last stand. The bunker overlooks Sharankanoa Beach, where Ishida expects 10,000 American Marines to die in the surf. His men have rehearsed this moment countless times: interlocking fields of fire, hidden machine gun nests, artillery pieces camouflaged in caves carved deep into the coral cliffs. General Saito himself proclaimed their positions impregnable fortifications that will break the American spirit. At 0550 hours, the first muzzle flash erupts from USS Maryland. One of 4 Pearl Harbor veterans returned for revenge. Ishida instinctively ducks as the 15-second flight time ticks in his head. He's studied American bombardments at Tarawa and the Marshalls. He knows the pattern: massive firepower, terrible noise, but scattered impact. American gunners hit obvious targets: large buildings, visible structures, while defenders survive in concrete bunkers to slaughter Marines on the beaches. The first salvo screams overhead like freight trains torn from their tracks. Ishida braces for the random destruction he's witnessed before. Shells scattered across the island like deadly confetti, more psychological than tactical. But as the explosions begin, something feels wrong. The earth doesn't just shake, it convulses with surgical precision. Through his periscope, Ishida watches a camouflaged artillery position 200 yards north simply vanish in a cloud of smoke and coral dust. Not damaged, not suppressed, obliterated. His stomach drops as realization creeps in like poison. That position was invisible from the sea, hidden beneath weeks of careful camouflage. How could the Americans have known exactly where to aim? "Sir," Yamamoto's voice cracks. They're not firing blind. But how could American gunners see through darkness and smoke to hit targets with such terrifying accuracy? What Ishida witnessed next would shatter everything Japanese defenders believed about modern warfare. For 6 months, Ishida's men had transformed Saipan into a fortress designed to break American amphibious warfare. They'd studied every Allied invasion since Guadalcanal, analyzing tactical reports smuggled from the front lines. The pattern was always identical: overwhelming but inaccurate bombardment, followed by Marines struggling through prepared killing fields. Japan's advantage lay in concrete, camouflage, and careful positioning. General Yoshitsugu Saito had personally inspected their defenses in May, nodding approvingly at the interlocking bunker system. The Americans rely on firepower because they lack the warrior spirit for close combat, he declared, standing where Ishida now crouched. When their bombardment ends, they will find death waiting in every cave, every hidden position. The Japanese had reason for confidence. Their coastal guns were positioned using techniques perfected on the Maginot Line, concrete casemates built into natural coral formations, invisible from aerial reconnaissance. Artillery pieces hid in caves connected by tunnels that took 3 months to excavate. Each machine gun nest was sited to create overlapping fields of fire that would transform the beaches into slaughter grounds. But as the bombardment continued, Ishida watched those carefully prepared positions disappear with methodical precision. The coastal gun at Efetna Point, built into a natural coral cave and camouflaged with living vegetation, received 3 direct hits in succession. The ammunition bunker at Grid Square 185, buried 6 feet underground and covered with steel plates, erupted in a fireball that killed 12 men instantly. Most impossible of all, the communication bunker hidden beneath a false rice paddy was eliminated by a single salvo that landed within 10 yards of its concealed entrance. "They're not guessing," Sergeant Yamamoto reported, racing into the bunker covered in concrete dust and coral fragments. His usually steady voice trembled with disbelief. When our coastal battery fired back, their return salvo landed directly on our gun position within 3 minutes. "Sir, they know exactly where we are." Through his periscope, Ishida studied the American fleet with growing dread. The ships moved in precise formations, their guns traversing with mechanical accuracy. But something else caught his attention. Strange antenna arrays rotating atop the vessels, unlike anything in Japanese intelligence reports. These weren't the simple optical rangefinders they'd studied. These looked like mechanical eyes, sweeping across the battlefield. The systematic destruction continued hour after hour. Gun positions carefully sighted to be invisible from the sea were eliminated with surgical precision. Admiral Nagumo himself, watching from his observation tower 3 miles inland, stared transfixed at the American fleet. His yeoman, Mitsuhara Noda, later recalled the Admiral's stunned words. "Those are battleships we sank at Pearl Harbor. How can dead ships shoot like gods?" By noon, intercepted American radio communications revealed fragments of an impossible truth. Ishida's English was limited, but he recognized technical terms that made no sense. Radar fire control, shell splash observation, electronic ranging. The Americans weren't relying on optical sighting. They were using some form of electronic detection that could see through smoke, darkness, and camouflage. "Sir, the battalion command bunker is gone," reported Corporal Tanaka, stumbling through the entrance with blood trickling from his ears. "Direct hit through the ventilation shaft. Major Harada is dead. They knew exactly where to aim." The psychological impact rippled through the garrison like a virus. Japanese defenders had prepared to die gloriously against overwhelming odds, but this felt different, supernatural, inevitable. How do you fight an enemy that can see the invisible and strike with divine precision? As darkness fell on June 13th, Ishida expected relief from the bombardment. Night had always been Japan's ally. Darkness that concealed movement, confused targeting, and allowed wounded positions to recover. But the American shells continued falling with the same terrifying accuracy. Muzzle flashes lit the horizon like lightning, followed by explosions that found their targets despite complete darkness. "They can see in the dark," whispered Private Sato, the youngest man in the bunker at barely 18. His words hung in the air like an accusation against the natural order. How can men see in the dark? Ishida had no answer. Everything he'd learned about warfare, every tactical principle drummed into him at military academy, crumbled under the weight of this technological impossibility. The Americans had somehow transcended the basic limitations of human warfare. Distance, darkness, and concealment no longer offered protection. Through his periscope, he watched USS Maryland's main battery traverse toward the northern shore. 15 seconds later, the camouflaged ammunition dump at Marpy Point, hidden beneath a false hillside and protected by 20 feet of coral, disappeared in a chain of secondary explosions that lit the entire island. "Prepare for ground assault," Ishida ordered, his voice hollow with defeat he couldn't yet acknowledge. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth that would haunt Japanese defenders for the remainder of the war. They weren't fighting men anymore. They were fighting machines that could see through stone and strike with mathematical precision. What happened next would transform Lieutenant Ishida's understanding of warfare forever, as the impossible became terrifyingly real. Dawn of June 14th brought no respite. If anything, the American bombardment intensified with a mechanical rhythm that felt more like industrial execution than military action. Ishida pressed his face against the periscope, watching USS Maryland's turrets rotate with servo-motor precision toward targets that should have been invisible to human eyes. Contact bearing 045, range 18,000 yards, crackled through intercepted American radio communications. The English was clearer now. Ishida's desperation had sharpened his comprehension. Radar contact confirmed. Guns ready. Radar. The word meant nothing to most Japanese defenders, but Ishida had studied engineering before the war. Electronic detection, radio waves bouncing off objects to reveal their location. But that was theoretical technology, laboratory experiments. It couldn't possibly work at sea, through smoke and darkness, with enough precision to guide naval gunfire. The next salvo proved him wrong. 3 16-inch shells landed within 15 yards of a hidden artillery bunker carved into the coral cliffs of Mount Tapochau. The position had taken 2 months to construct, camouflaged so perfectly that Japanese observers couldn't spot it from 500 yards. Yet American gunners, firing from ships 20 miles offshore, placed their shells with surgical accuracy. "Sir, they're adjusting fire in real time," Sergeant Yamamoto reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Watch the pattern. First salvo, 3 shells slightly long. Second salvo, 2 shells, direct hits. They can see their own shell splashes and correct instantly." Ishida studied the American fleet through his periscope, focusing on those strange rotating antenna arrays. As he watched, the USS Massachusetts fired a salvo at the northern shore. Seconds later, he saw the antennas rotate fractionally, as if following the shell's flight path. When the shells impacted near a camouflaged machine gun nest, the antennas paused. Then the ship's guns traversed slightly left. The next salvo obliterated the position completely. "Impossible," breathed Corporal Tanaka. "They're watching their own shells land from 20 miles away. How can metal eyes see what human eyes cannot?" The systematic destruction continued with mechanical inevitability. Each Japanese position revealed by muzzle flash or radio transmission was eliminated within minutes. The Americans had somehow transcended the fundamental limitations of naval warfare. They could observe, calculate, and strike with mathematical precision that bordered on supernatural. Admiral Nagumo's headquarters, built into a natural cave system beneath Mount Dani, had withstood 3 days of bombardment. Japanese engineers considered it impregnable. 60 feet of coral rock overhead, multiple escape tunnels, communication lines buried 20 feet underground. At 13:47 hours on June 14th, a salvo of 8-inch shells from USS Louisville found the hidden ventilation shaft and dropped high explosive rounds directly into the command center. Nagumo survived, but his staff officers died instantly. When the smoke cleared, the admiral stared at the precise crater pattern with the expression of a man watching gods at war. "They can see through mountains," he whispered to his surviving aide. "What kind of devils have we awakened?" The psychological impact spread through the garrison like contagion. Japanese defenders had prepared to die gloriously against overwhelming odds, but this felt like execution by machines that possessed inhuman senses. Radio operators reported conversations between terrified soldiers. They know where we breathe. American ships have demon eyes. We are fighting ghosts that see through stone. By June 15th, when the first Marine landing craft approached the beaches, Japanese coastal defenses had been systematically eliminated with 85% effectiveness. Positions that should have held for weeks were obliterated before the first American boot touched coral sand. The elaborate defensive plan, based on stopping invaders at the shoreline, collapsed under the weight of technological revolution. Ishida watched the Marines wade ashore through his damaged periscope, expecting the slaughter that should have greeted them. Instead, he saw American troops advancing against scattered, demoralized resistance. His carefully positioned machine gun nests were silent, their crews dead beneath tons of precisely delivered high explosive. The interlocking fields of fire existed only on tactical maps. The reality was crater-pocked coral and the smell of cordite. "Sir, we have to retreat to the interior," Yamamoto urged. "The beach positions are finished." But even retreat offered no sanctuary. As Japanese defenders fell back toward Mount Tapochau's slopes, American naval gunfire followed them with relentless accuracy. Radio transmissions were tracked and eliminated. Vehicle movements drew instant fire. Even individual soldiers running between positions were targeted by shells that seemed to anticipate their movements. The breaking point came when Private Sato, the 18-year-old who had whispered about American night vision, broke cover to rescue wounded comrades from a destroyed bunker. He ran in a zigzag pattern, using every concealment technique taught in infantry training. An 8-inch shell from USS Indianapolis landed 3 feet behind him, killing him instantly. "They can see individual soldiers," Corporal Tanaka stated flatly. "From 20 miles away, through smoke and dust, they can see one man running." The words hung in the air like a death sentence against rational warfare. Everything Japanese defenders understood about combat, cover, concealment, camouflage, had become obsolete in the face of electronic eyes that penetrated every hiding place. As Ishida's surviving men huddled in their partially collapsed bunker, intercepted American communications revealed the full scope of their technological nightmare. Mark 8. Fire control radar could track 16-inch shell splashes at ranges exceeding 35,000 yards with 15-yard accuracy. Mark 25 radar systems painted surface targets through smoke screens and darkness. Fire control computers calculated range, bearing, and wind drift faster than human gunners could operate manual systems. "We are not fighting Americans," Ishida finally admitted to his men as explosions walked closer to their position. "We are fighting their machines, and their machines do not miss." The revelation that broke Japanese defenders' will wasn't just technological, it was psychological. They had prepared to die with honor against human enemies. But how do you maintain warrior spirit against electronic demons that see through mountains and strike with mathematical precision? How do you die gloriously when your enemy eliminates you from beyond the horizon without ever seeing your face? On June 16th, as American forces pushed inland with devastating fire support, Ishida made the decision that would haunt him forever. Rather than die uselessly in a concrete tomb, he ordered his surviving men to attempt breakthrough to Japanese lines on Mount Tapochau. They would run at dawn, using smoke and scattered formations to confuse the electronic eyes watching from offshore. They never had a chance. American radar tracked their movement from the moment they left cover. Naval gunfire eliminated them systematically with precision that seemed almost personal in its accuracy. Of 43 men who began the defense of Charinkanoa Beach, only 7 survived to reach Japanese lines, and Ishida wasn't among them. But his story didn't end with heroic death. What happened to Lieutenant Masaaki Ishida next would reveal the true human cost of technological revolution in warfare. Lieutenant Ishida survived the bombardment, but not in the way he'd imagined. On June 18th, wounded and delirious from 3 days without water, he stumbled into the most unlikely captor in Marine Corps history, 18-year-old PFC Guy Gabaldon, a Mexican-American kid from East Los Angeles who spoke perfect Japanese. Gabaldon found Ishida collapsed near a destroyed artillery position, muttering about electronic demons and machine eyes that see through stone. What should have been a routine prisoner capture became something extraordinary. Gabaldon, raised by a Japanese-American foster family, understood not just Ishida's words, but his psychological devastation. "You want to know how we could see your positions?" Gabaldon asked in fluent Japanese, offering water from his canteen. "Radar. Electronic eyes that bounce radio waves off targets, your shells, your bunkers, even individual soldiers. Everything shows up on our screens like stars in the night sky." Ishida's response haunted Gabaldon for decades afterward. "We never had a chance, did we? All our preparation, all our concrete and steel, worthless against American machines." The technological shock of radar fire control at Saipan fundamentally transformed Pacific warfare, but not just tactically, psychologically. Japanese defenders realized that their traditional advantages, defensive positions, camouflage, night operations, offered no protection against an enemy equipped with electronic senses. The impact contributed directly to the largest banzai charge in Pacific War history, as 4,311 Japanese troops died in a desperate final assault on July 7th, choosing death over continued resistance against technologically superior forces. But the revolution extended far beyond one battle. Admiral Nagumo, who survived the Saipan bombardment only to commit suicide as American forces closed in, left behind a final report that reached Emperor Hirohito himself. "American radar technology has made traditional naval warfare obsolete. Our concrete fortifications offer no more protection than paper screens against electronic eyes that see through darkness and smoke." The psychological impact rippled through Japanese high command. General Hideki Tojo, facing the reality of Saipan's fall, admitted privately that Japan was fighting an enemy that had transcended human limitations in warfare. The concept of technological warfare, machines fighting machines while humans became secondary, represented a fundamental shift that Japanese military doctrine couldn't accommodate. For American forces, Saipan proved that electronic warfare had arrived ahead of schedule. The Mark 8 and Mark 25 radar systems that seemed so experimental in 1943 became standard equipment throughout the Pacific Fleet. What began as electronic shell splash spotting evolved into integrated fire control systems that could track, target, and destroy enemy positions with mechanical precision that human gunners couldn't match. Today's precision-guided munitions trace their lineage directly to the radar fire control revolution that shocked Japanese defenders at Saipan. GPS-guided bombs, laser-targeted missiles, and drone warfare all follow the same principle that proved so devastating in June 1944. Electronic eyes that see beyond human limitations, calculating trajectories, and targeting with mathematical accuracy. The human cost extended beyond battlefield casualties. Ishida, who survived American captivity and returned to Japan in 1946, spent the rest of his life trying to explain what he'd witnessed to a generation that couldn't comprehend technological warfare. His post-war interviews reveal a man fundamentally changed by encountering machines that possessed capabilities beyond human understanding. "We prepared to fight Americans," he told Japanese historians in 1965. "But we fought their electronic spirits instead." How do you maintain warrior honor against an enemy that kills you from beyond the horizon without ever seeing your face? Guy Gabaldon, who convinced over 800 Japanese soldiers to surrender during the Saipan campaign, understood that technology had changed warfare's psychological dimensions as much as its tactical ones. The Pied Piper of Saipan realized that Japanese resistance collapsed not just from firepower, but from the psychological impact of facing technologically superior forces that seemed to possess supernatural capabilities. The Battle of Saipan marked the moment when warfare became truly modern, when electronic technology began determining victory as much as courage, training, or tactical skill. For Japanese defenders who expected to fight with honor and die with glory, the systematic destruction by invisible electronic systems represented something beyond military defeat. It was the death of an entire philosophy of warfare, replaced by the cold precision of machines that never miss their targets. In understanding this transformation, we glimpse our own future, where human warriors increasingly face electronic enemies that see everything, calculate perfectly, and strike with mathematical inevitability.